Hi, everyone. Welcome. So thank you for joining today's Flansburgh Young Designer Award presentation. So I'm Mark Rukamathu, and I'm a member of the BSA's Honors and Awards Committee, which I co-chair with Elizabeth Cristoforetti of Supernormal, and who's a faculty at Harvard's Graduate School of Design. So the Flansburgh Young Designer Award recognizes design excellence by an architect under 40. It's juried by the BSA's Honors and Awards Committee, whom are voted into the committee by the BSA members, and each serve a 3-year term. So besides myself and Elizabeth, who are on the committee, in 2023, the committee group, which was the cycle that selected this year's Flansburgh recipient, included David Eisen of Abacus Architects, Sam Lasky of William Ron Associates, Tom Chung of Lears Weinzapfel. I see Tom joined us here as well. And I'm Kelly Haig of Design Lab. Kelly's here. Hi, Kelly. And since then, this was selected in our 2023 cycle. So we're in the 2024 cycle now. And both Sam and David have rolled off the committee. And now we have Alex Fernandez of Gensler and Brooke Heglerson of Analog Studio who have joined the committee for this cycle. So we were we're really fun work with the committee. We essentially do a lot of nominating for various AIA awards and BSA awards, and this particular for the Flansburgh, we jury this one ourselves. So the BSA's Flansburgh Young Designer Award, it's named for Earl R. Flansburgh, who was FIAA, a distinguished Boston architect and founder of Flansburgh Associates. They completed tons of projects around town, a lot of educational facilities, and during a career that spanned more than 45 years. Flansburgh, he was the BSA president in 1981 and was the 1999 BSA Award of Honor winner, and generously supports emerging professionals and advocates for women architects. The firm he founded has been guided by a philosophy that well-designed buildings improve the quality of our lives, and this award is co-sponsored by the Flansburgh family. The prize includes an online exhibition of the winner's work hosted through the BSA's website, a lecture, which today is the lecture, which Kyle will be giving us, and a 1-year membership to the Boston Society of Architecture, and recognition at the annual BSA Awards Gala, which I believe Kyle already got that recognition at the gala. I've mentioned Kyle's name. So Kyle Barker is the 2023 Flansburgh Young Designer Award recipient. And Kyle is the founder of Primary Projects. It's an architecture firm with a commitment to a more communal, affordable, and sustainable housing. He's also a recipient of the Roach Traveling Scholarship. And with that, he traveled across Europe, Australia, and Japan to study collective housing models. He's a member of the Design Advisory Council for the Co-Housing Association of the United States and has taught several housing studios at Northeastern University. Over the past few years, he's been active in designing sustainable, prefabricated straw kind of panel houses in Maine. He's a BSA member and co-chairs the Small Practice Network Knowledge Community. I'd say overall, Kyle is an extremely thoughtful and remarkable architect. I have to admit, I know Kyle. Originally, Kyle and I met on some academic reviews at both the Boston Architectural College and Northeastern. And later on, I had the privilege of knowing Kyle while we worked together during our time at Merge Architects. When I saw Kyle's award submission, given all this, I had to recuse myself because I know Kyle personally, so I couldn't really be part of the voting process on this. However, when the rest of the committee saw Kyle's work, they felt, really strongly that his work really demonstrated the utmost quality and was really deserving of this recognition. Besides all this, Kyle is just a super awesome person. So I'm really delighted that he's our 2023 Flansburgh recipient. And Elizabeth, I see that you've joined us now. Would you like to, you want to chime in on this?
Yeah, sure, Kyle. It's just such an awesome honor to have you be presenting today. It's really exciting. I will also add that, I'm on a couple of awards committees, and Kyle happened to be the winner of the the Roach, which was the last committee I was on as well. And these are sort of anonymous kinds of things, and as we go over portfolios, Kyle's work just really shone through in terms of not only his capacity to create really remarkable form, but incredibly thoughtful integration from a cultural perspective. So I'm very excited to see this work, Kyle. Congratulations.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I think with that, Kyle, please welcome Kyle to present his work to us today. Thank you.
Okay. Just want to make sure that the screen share is working. Mark, can you just give me a thumbs up if you can see the slide?
Thumbs
Okay,
up.
great. Well, thank you for that really kind introduction. I should take you around everywhere with me. I am also really happy to see that all my shameless self-promotion worked. Thank you for coming. I see a lot of friends and the attendees and family. So kind of in the spirit of thanks, I just wanted to thank the BSA for this venue to present the work today, also for the awards program more generally. There was something else I was going to say. Oh, sorry. I just saw that the like waiting room thing is coming up, so I'll ignore that going forward. Yeah, so anyway, I just wanted to thank the BSA. I also wanted to thank my family and friends and collaborators, and thank the awards committee as well. I think that working on these sort of awards is always this incredibly introspective thing. And part of the Flansburgh submission is it's based on a portfolio. It's also based on 3 letters of recommendation and a personal statement. And so while I was working on it, I sent the kind of draft material to one of my recommenders. And her response was, it's not bad, it's just not what it could be, which is like the kindest way of telling someone that they need to try again. And I was about a week out from the deadline. And in the call, she, this is like one of the smartest, busiest people I know, but she spent the time to talk me through it. And I was saying, the awards committee is going to be reviewing many of these, and you have 20 pages. And so I thought focusing on a few projects made sense. And she just very firmly said, that's not what makes you special. What makes you special is that you've had a commitment to thinking about housing in different ways over the last 10 years. And she said, so it's not just a few projects, it's kind of a body of work. And I said, well, if I were to do that, that would be like 20 projects. And she just said, mm-hmm. And so I was like, oh, okay. So I did the thing that I always do in those moments, and I went back to my sketchbook. And so this is kind of how it started, with this like word cloud of the things I care about and the things that I wanted to convey in the submission. And then it very quickly got into sort of like the mechanics of, okay, how am I going to go from where I am to there in a very short amount of time? And I think, like all of us, I work across different modes. I always love seeing people's process, so I've tried to include a little bit of that in today's presentation. And I think, I looked at, this was a Miro board. So all of these little Post-its or projects, I color coded them by things that were kind of my own initiative, stuff that I did while I was working at Merge Architects, stuff that I did at Mass Design Group. And then I started to kind of group them thematically. And then to think about, this has to fit within 25 pages. Because of the varying requirements, there's about 20 where you can show work. And so I started to think about how it would kind of shake out across the pages of the portfolio. And although on the call with her, I'd said it would be like 20 projects, it ended up being 40 projects, which is, if you just do the math on that, that's like 2 to a page. And so I was worried about the kind of cognitive load on the reviewers, having been on an awards jury myself. I know that when you're reviewing many things, especially something in this case that's 20 pages, if you're trying to absorb the details of 40 projects, but then also how it forms some larger body, that's just a lot to ask. And so my solution to that kind of problem was to have like a narrative voice that spoke across the many projects. And so this is from the first page of it, which is mostly the personal statement, but what you see down here in the right is the start of that kind of like narrative voice. And so what I actually wrote was, basically, apologies, there's a lot here, and to make it less mentally taxing, I've narrated it. So on each page, look for the highlighted text in the top left. It's what I'd say to contextualize it if I was sitting there with you. And so this is the project page from the portfolio. But again, like to minimize the kind of load on the reviewer, every page followed the same format of having that sort of overarching text in the top left, more or less like how I see the project stringing together. And then the kind of basics of, title, like a hook, some detailed information, the project description. And so what I thought was nice about this format, which is true of most portfolios, is that if they were kind of drawn in by the text up here or the images, they could read more about the project, but it didn't rely on them kind of going deep on every project. So I also use this tone to kind of convey when we were still within a project. And then when you would get to the next one, it would go back to this format. So you would kind of clearly understand you were in a new project. I had a few other pages in there where I would show many projects at one time where I thought they rolled up into one kind of clear theme. And so this was the only other kind of style of page I had. But again, you can see it largely follows that same format. It just has several projects instead of one, which are then keyed in the bottom there. So obviously, like a presentation like this is very different than a portfolio. A portfolio, you can view it on your own terms and you can take deep dives on certain projects that are interested and skip over others. I think it would be cruel to go through 40 projects today in the time that we have. So I've chosen to focus on about 10 of them and do a little bit of a deeper dive on those. And I thought I would start with the personal statement, which is the thing that I think all of the work kind of rolls back up to. So I'm not going to read the personal statement because I think that would be very dry. But it was like version 4 of what I wrote. And I do feel like it captures kind of the gestalt of what I care about. And so I've kind of visualized it and I'm going to narrate the images as we cycle through them. So for over 70 years, housing has failed to meet our collective needs, proliferating single-family homes catered to white, hetero, middle-class, nuclear families to the exclusion of everyone else. My graduate thesis, a look at how architecture could facilitate sharing in the American suburbs, proposed another model. In it, I saw the potential for a more communal, affordable, and sustainable alternative. Since then, I've worked, taught, volunteered, competed, and traveled with the goal of building the skills and relationships required to make housing better. 2 years ago, well, it's 2 years at a time, 3 years now, I launched my own practice, Primary Projects, to address unmet housing needs by cultivating the radical potential in housing outliers. Things like multi-generational housing, co-housing communities, accessory dwelling units, and all of the misfits in between. The focus has helped me identify additional areas for growth, specifically a better understanding of building science, embodied carbon, and regenerative design. After 20 years in design, me as a baby, spent at 2 remarkably different schools and 6 offices across the spectrum of practice, my design values are also clearer. I'm interested in work that wrings the most out of its limited means, work that leverages the core elements of architecture to shape experience. Things like structure that doubles as expression, light and shadow that punctuate key moments, and so on. When I'm successful, this culling of excess clarifies concept, lowers cost, simplifies construction, and reduces carbon. The following is a work sample that illustrates my drive toward an architecture that's simple in form, generous in the possibilities it affords, and transparent with the lessons along the way. So I've broken this up today into a few chapters. This first one is called Finishing School, but I also sort of like that it sounds like finishing school. So this is my thesis at MIT, which in the portfolio I said was the project that launched 1,000 metaphorical ships. My thesis advisor in grad school was Anna Miljacki, who I owe like a ton to for shaping me as a thinker. But this project was looking at how housing in the American suburb could facilitate sharing. And so the thesis research started by looking at the way that we stored things through time. And so this went from the physical to the digital, but really what this kind of timeline opened up for me was a realization that storage is kind of just a manifestation of our overarching consumption. And I looked at like this diagram that I made is looking at how our homes have doubled in size over the last, at the time, about 70 years. And in that time, our family sizes have actually shrunk. So our per capita square footage has tripled. Uh, and then I was also looking at how much more storage we have in those homes, not just in the home themselves, but also in like offsite storage, looking at what's happened to our savings, credit card debt, just kind of all the uh, outcomes of more consumption, which include things like environmental degradation. Hoarding was a really hot topic at the time. So, I also talked about kind of sponsoring new disorders. But I think I also saw this sort of nascent sharing economy. So this project was from about, I guess, 10 years ago, started about 12 years ago. And so at the time, Zipcar had just come on the scene, bike sharing was popular in cities, but then also other ways of sharing things like all of these digital services like Netflix. So I think what I was realizing was there was a kind of emerging generation that didn't seem to care as much about ownership as it did about experience. And so I was curious, if we use 20% of our objects 80% of the time, which means that we have to have a lot of stuff that we're rarely using, how could architecture sponsor the sharing of those objects? And how could that extend even to spaces? Like if we think about dining rooms, a formal dining room, most people say that that's no longer a space that they want in their house. So again, how could we sort of Venn diagram our housing to sponsor that sharing as a way of promoting affordability, community, and also less consumption or greater sustainability? So the project was set in the suburbs of Houston. I started the project by looking at the top 10 best-selling floor plans in the US and taking them very seriously. And so I was kind of wanted to understand like what were the deeper logics that were driving people to the suburbs. And so I did these series of diagramming of each one, like looking at the distance from the car to the fridge, where they had covered outdoor space, how much storage was in the floor plans. And so I did this across many of these houses, which have amazing names like La Attesa de Vita. Um, and I did that as a way of kind of distilling these, I called them suburban spatial commandments, but like what is the kind of deep structure of these things? And so again, like one example was that the fridge should not be any further than 49 feet from where you park. So this allowed me to kind of incorporate the logics of these things without just mimicking their forms. So then I took that number one house and I 3D modeled it, and I got really into kind of all of its various components, things like half baths, linen closets, bonus rooms, all these things. So that's the home kind of broken into these little pieces. And then I took each of those pieces and I looked at kind of what the archive of housing history had to offer. And so this goes from the kind of single serving version to the kind of maxed out multifamily version along a gradient. And so I looked at all of these different parts of the home and thought like, what are ways that we can make them more communal? So I'm just showing a few of those. This is the part that like gets a little weird, but I think in a positive way. So just to orient you to what these drawings are, the top half of them is a plan and the bottom half is like a tilted up kind of dollhouse view, or like what an architect would call an axon. And so what this is showing, so this is like a 4-unit thing. I took these pieces that I'd made, so both the pieces of that existing house, but then also all these communal pieces, and I started to arrange them and reimagine them in a kind of playful way as multifamily housing. So thinking, when 2 garages are next to each other, oh, well, these units could share a garage. When 2 bonus rooms are next to each other, oh, that could be a shared play space between 2 adjacent units. So I did that across several different arrangements. And the one that was the most exciting to me was this one, which was I called it an octuplex. So it was like an 8-unit configuration. And all this text is just calling out the kind of communal potentials I was seeing in this stage of the project, which I then translated into like real floor plans that had closets and, proper dimensions and things like that. So this is showing, I ended up being a 16-unit thing because I was able to fit second floor and think about how those related to each other in section. But just to zoom in and talk about maybe one thing about the project. So this is showing, this side of the thing is showing 2 units. So Mark, are you able to see the mouse when I move it? Yeah, okay, cool.
Yes, we can see it.
Great. I've had this kind of fail on sharing things before. So the idea was that the house itself is kind of split into, so this is 1 unit. So that would be living space. And then this would be kind of the working space. And so the like home office was given its own spot separated by this entry area. And what I thought was exciting about that at the time was that we were talking more and more about work from home. Obviously, we've only talked more about that now post-COVID. But what excited me was the idea that these 2 units could have co-work space at home so this is just mirror to the other side, that they could share and that could connect in with their adjacent neighbors so that this, while you're working from home, you don't have to be alone. You can share that space with your neighbors, and you could even make that like an amenity that's open to the broader public. The sharing manifested in many ways. The blue in that previous drawing was coding all the spots where that was happening. This is just one kind of extreme example in the kitchen where you could have a communal cabinet with your neighbor where you share like a KitchenAid and maybe like a big lava rock. And then I took that research to the kind of more like urban, or in this case, suburban scale, and analyzed the, like the block. And so again, these were looking at stuff like front yard, backyard, where trees were. And again, distilled that into these commandments that I then took to kind of help inform the urban scale of the project. So this was the kind of final result of the project. So I'm going to zoom in a little. So this is showing like what you just saw is 16 units and then how that interfaces with another one. And so what you're seeing on this page is 64 units in the space of what is like probably about 12 in the surrounding context. And I was interested in how like these 4 would share a driveway, but then these 4 would share a courtyard, and these 4, which and the broader community would start to share something like a pool. So you get these different scales of sharing that happen across the community. Okay, so I'm going to shift to work. So after grad school, I worked at Mass Design Group for 2 years and Merge Architects for 6. Across that time, I worked on a broad range of projects. One of the things that interested me in both firms was that they both seemed to have kind of a specialty, but did a broad range of work. And so, so the top row here is Mass Design Group projects, and the bottom 2 rows are projects that I did while I was at Merge. But the point really of showing all this work is that it was a real kind of typological range, everything from an ice cream shop to a barber shop to a creperie, a hospital, schools. But across this, there was a lot of housing. And so the one that I'm going to show you was the last project that I worked on at Merge, which was 20 units of workforce housing in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. So this project, like you couldn't imagine really a better project site. It's right at the base of Snow King Mountain. So it's in the heart of downtown Jackson. This neighborhood is largely fairly big single-family homes and duplexes. And so one of the things that was important to us on this project, which actually spans 4 kind of single-family home size parcels, was to have it fit at the scale of the neighborhood. And so this is 20 units, but broken into these 3 volumes. So when we look at a plan, I'm just going to point out a few things. So 1, it's off a cul-de-sac. So you can see that that has some impact on the building form. The client was really interested in a building that was repetitive as a cost-saving measure. But we wanted something that didn't look repetitive from the street. We also didn't want to have, like, the simplest thing would be to build a big building that had all 20 units inside of it. But we thought that that wouldn't be in keeping with the neighborhood. And so, so what we did was we have these 3 volumes that are broken by these 2 lobbies. The yellow in these drawings is keying the entry points into the buildings. And so this is what's known as like point load housing, meaning it's not corridor based. You enter the units, in this case, largely from the stairs. So it's a little easier to see on the 2nd and 3rd floor. So you can see that either 2 or 3 units are entered off of the landings. And so what's great about that is it minimizes the circulation. And in this case, for the workforce housing, it allowed the units to be larger than they would have been otherwise. And also then that extra space was able to be given over to outdoor spaces, which you can see in the kind of lighter gray tone here. So every unit has some outdoor space in the form of a balcony. What you're also able to see in these plans is that because, again, the client was interested in controlling cost, we were able to kind of duplicate the plan, and then on this one, essentially just mirror it. So there was a lot of efficiency, but it doesn't look repetitive. And again, this little bump out here was just by virtue of that cul-de-sac and taking advantage of the kind of additional space we had there. So again, when you see it from the street, you can see that it has the appearance of a smaller building or potentially 3 buildings. And you can see the balconies on the outside of it that I mentioned. Because the building is viewed kind of equally from both sides, we also paid a lot of attention to the back of the building. So I just wanted to show it from this vantage point. It has some, the parking requirements are quite high in Jackson. And so we had surface parking and then also a series of garages, most of which are tandem. And then just some more detail and kind of character shots. Okay, so the roach, so this was mentioned in the introduction. So the roach, just for those of you that don't know, it's a 2-stage design competition. So the prize is a $40,000 travel award. And so it's a 2-stage design competition. So the first stage is a weekend long. So you're given a brief on Friday at noon and it's due Monday. And usually 5 people are chosen from that first round. They enter the finals with the runner-up from the previous year. And so 6 people typically compete in that final competition, which is 10 days. That is usually a larger scale project. And then after you win, you submit a research agenda, which is approved by the jury. So I entered it 5 times. I really wanted to win. The little green dots are when I entered the first round. The darker ones are when I was in the finals. So, so basically, there were a few times where I bonked out. There were a few times where I made the finals. And then in 2020, I was the runner-up and won in 2021. So today, I'm just going to talk about 2 of my first round entries. But if you want to know, if you want to like learn more about the times that I won, I gave a talk about that for the BSA a few years ago with my friend David Costanza, who had won the previous year. And David's work is excellent, so that alone would be a reason to watch. He focused on his winning entry, and then I went through my winning entry and then the other ones that preceded it in sort of a shorter way. So the first one is called Thick House. In the portfolio, what I really focused on in that little yellow text was that this was the first time that I had experimented with panelized prefab, which will show up in the later work. But just to draw that out, the idea was that I was interested in, so that, let me just say, the brief for this project was essentially like design the house of the present. And it used the Glass House by Philip Johnson as something that was indicative of a kind of like paradigmatic house of that time period. So we wouldn't build an all glass house in the Northeast in 2020 or 2017 or whatever this was. And so my approach was to think of like, how could we take kind of the energy of passive house where we're building with really thick walls and think about it in a slightly different way. So rather than being like a bunch of layers, like the way that we typically build walls, what if we were just building with like a really thick material? And so the idea was that we use a structural shape and we create a mold and then cast into that mold. I was using in the project, like you had to do all this stuff about how much the house weighed and stuff. So I learned about aerated autoclaved concrete, and that was what I proposed for this as something that has like it's very big and has it's not as heavy as it is big, but also has a high R value or insulative value. And so the idea was that it's a structural module that can be used in multiple orientations. So this is showing like a ceiling panel meeting a wall panel. And I was also thinking about then building services being exposed and running on the interior face rather than being concealed in the cavity of the wall. So this was kind of how all those modules went together to create the house. After the competition, I went back and like worked a little bit more on the representation. And this is an image of like what the proposed house would look like. So you can see like some of the modules are facing to the outside of the building and some of them are facing to the inside. And also it becomes essentially like a pier foundation that it sits on. This is the plan. So very simple programmatically, essentially a large living and kitchen area, a bedroom and a bathroom. And then just a sense of what like that space looks like on the inside. So this is that living space, the bedroom, and then just the seams that where those modules come together. So again, like the point of me showing this is just that I didn't know really anything about straw, which we'll figure in a big way in a few minutes, or panelized prefab, but I was interested in this in a kind of conceptual way. I view the Roach projects actually as sort of like the ingredients that then get used later in the practice. So this is my other another entry from the prelims. This time I was not picked for the next round, but this was really like a model for housing multi-generational families. So this is a neighborhood in Boston that has a really long block structure. And so this would be like a street on this side and a street here. So this is showing two parcels. This was the competition site, was two parcels that backed up to each other. And so it was a pretty tricky dimension to work with, 170 feet by 14 feet wide on the narrow side. This side had more of a commercial character and this more of a residential. And in the program, they asked for 3 housing units and then something else. And you could define what that was, but it had to be public facing. So I thought that what made sense was to provide a mid-block cut through so that you didn't have to go to the far ends of the street. That could be animated in some way. So I'll show that in a moment. And then fill up the rest of the parcel with housing that could more or less align with this kind of development pattern on the residential side. So I was inspired for that promenade. I was inspired by like these arcades of France, by Joseph Paxton's Crystal Palace. Like that wrought iron is obviously a thing of its time, but I was thinking about like Sol LeWitt and maybe actually, Jim Henson is sort of like maybe where that came to me from. But like thinking about building out this promenade with timber and like a greenhouse kind of tectonic. And I didn't actually know about this project at the time by Lacaton and Basal, the Latipi House, but I did know about their other work where they often use things like this, like a winter garden. So this is sort of like the ingredients that went into the thinking. And this is how the project turned out. So this was on the narrow side of the plot. So you're looking down that 170 feet at the 14-foot wide. These are commercial buildings on either side. And so the thinking was that this mid-block cut through becomes this kind of promenade where the plants serve a few functions. They can be a place for people that live here to plant. They could be rented to the public, but they also then provide like a privacy buffer to the people in the house. What you're seeing is that the greenhouse actually steps up and down in section to kind of hold the edges of the site. So this is a long section. So you have These are the kind of two edges. So you're holding it at the heights of the adjacent buildings. But then it's also creating this rhythm that like makes this very long thing feel shorter, but also a little bit more spectacular, and allows for moments where you can have taller things like trees growing. The triple decker is a really common type in Boston. And what that means is it's 3 flats stacked on top of each other. And so it is incredible. It's an incredible housing type that works for a million things. When considering a multi-family living situation, or rather an intergenerational living situation, it's not the most optimal because you have this redundancy of kitchens and the living space is sort of sized for a single family. So the proposal was to take that and flip it to the ground floor, reduce the redundancy in the kitchen. So you just have one big kitchen instead of 3 small ones. You have larger living space, and then you put the bedrooms above that so that they have more privacy. So this is kind of putting it all together. So you can see the long promenade there, with the greenhouse, and then the housing. So I'm going to zoom on the housing. So the kind of orange tone here is indicating all of that shared space. So you have this generous kitchen and living space, various things happening like shared laundry, place to put bikes, sitting areas. And so this gives you a sense of the character of that. So it's looking from the communal kitchen to the outside. This space bleeds out and connects to that promenade through these sliding doors. So this is now looking the other direction to give you a sense of that connection. And then I also realized that, especially in an intergenerational living situation, not everyone can do stairs. And so this is including a bedroom on the ground floor, for that family members that can't. And I was also kind of testing multiple ideas of thinking about like, how could you have a small economic generating thing out of this housing, like a small family business. So this is the idea, was that it's like a taco stand that comes out of this house right next to the kitchen. As you go up in the house to the upper levels, it's straightforward. It's just bedrooms and bathrooms. Bathrooms are split so that they can be used during the morning rush. Windows intentionally misaligned for privacy. And one thing that I was excited about was each of the bedrooms has a window that goes to the outside and then a window that goes into the greenhouse. So the tagline for the project became like, pick a coconut from your bedroom window. I'm always interested in like how to, maybe because I love summer, but how you can transport like some other climate to our very cold Boston climate. And then this is just viewing it from the street. Okay, so the last bit is launching primary projects. So again, just a reminder, my firm is called Primary Projects. And I think, as Mark said in the intro, I'm really interested in the most communal, sustainable, affordable architecture that I can do. I'm specifically interested in housing. And so this has been a useful tool for me of when projects come in the door. Like, are they hitting in an overlap of any of these? Are they hitting at this kind of central point? If they're hitting somewhere outside of it or only in one, that was like a moment where I need to take a pause and think why I'm taking the project. So one of the first things I decided to enter, this was another competition, was for an accessory dwelling unit competition in Portland, Maine. And so while I was working on it, I reached out to a friend named Jack Barnes, who has a firm in Portland, Oregon, and asked him for a crit, which he did, and it was great. And he told me about his friend Andrew in Portland, Maine. And so I reached out to Andrew on Instagram. I was just like kind of fangirling in his DMs. He got back to me right away. We ended up being on a call like 3 hours later, and we just really hit it off. So, we were aligned kind of philosophically on design principles, but even just like aesthetics and stuff like that. So I told him he should enter the competition. They were exactly what he was looking for, or he was exactly what they were looking for. And by the end of the conversation, which was probably an hour, we decided to just go in together. And so we ended up using my design in his panel, and I sort of reoriented it. So Andrew is the founder of Croft, which I should mention. And that's his dog Lenny. So this is the panel that Andrew created for Croft. And just to be clear, it's a double stud wall. So for those of you that have seen construction, all construction in the US pretty much for houses is done with just a typical stud. As we've thought more about environmental performance, we started to have some of those walls be made of 2 layers of that so that you can have more insulation between. And so that's what this is. And so the straw is being infilled here like an insulation. And then it gets wrapped with like weather control layers. So this is before it's wrapped. So it's not straw bale, which I just wanted to get ahead of because I think everyone always thinks the straw is performing structurally. So the reason that I reached out to Andrew in the first place and that I was so excited by what he was doing was that when we started to think about high performance buildings, we started thinking about like, we got to insulate them, and everyone was using foam, and it's just a really gross way to insulate buildings. I think like there's so much embodied carbon in foam, and so you can actually end up kind of by adding more foam to your buildings, you can actually add, like you might be saving energy, but you're putting so much carbon into the atmosphere through the building materials that you're kind of like working against what you're after. And so what's exciting about straw is that it's the opposite. So literally it's the other end of the spectrum here. And that means that buildings can go from being like the chief emitter of, or one of the chief emitters of carbon to a carbon sink. So they can draw carbon in and then store it in a long-term way. And I would really recommend this book. Like if you're interested in this topic, this is just the book. So Build Beyond Zero. I can't say enough nice things about it. So this was our entry. And so just very quickly, one of the insights Jack had given me in the call was that ADUs, one of the chief problems is that you have like bikes and trash cans and stuff just starts like cluttering around it. And so we created essentially like a closet on the outside that captured that stuff. There's the bathroom and kitchen, which back up to each other to economize on plumbing and laundry, living space and bedroom. The bathroom is actually elevated so that it makes the coordination of the plumbing services through the slab a lot easier and a lot less precise. So we were trying to think about like ease of build. And so this is what it looks like. And then this is a diagram showing, so the gray is the Croft panels, and then the rest of the stuff is just like conventionally framed. So that closet is framed, the interior partitions are framed. And then this is just kind of the experience of what the would look like on itself. I just wanted to say a little bit about straw. And like, I already talked a little bit about the embodied carbon side of it. So good on that. The other things I think are great about it are it insulates really well. So that project that we were just looking at that had like an R value of about 60, which again, R value is what is like thermal resistance on the wall. So conventional homes are like 20. So it's not always that more is better, but often it is. And when you can replace something that's carbon intensive with something that's drawing carbon, it seems like a no-brainer. Utilize as byproduct is like a very fancy way of saying like we're not like diverting food streams into buildings. We're taking something that's kind of a leftover and using it in a smart way. It resists mold. So in the wall assembly that we were looking at earlier, it would take long, like it has a high gypsum content, which is what's in drywall and stuff. So the actual like the wood studs would mold before the straw would. It's packed densely in those wall assemblies. So similar to mass timber, it'll just kind of char and self-extinguish. So Croft has done fire testing. So it's a class A rated material, which is the best. This one is maybe like even the most important to me is it just like works within an existing paradigm. So it's something that we can all do today. It doesn't require like retooling buildings from top to bottom. And then the last one is just like it isn't gross. It's not like making the air quality worse. It's not like something that bugs love to get in like foam. So Andrew and I have gone on to do a lot of work together and with Croft more broadly. And also shout out to Caleb at the Croft team, who has also been like a real source of inspiration. But this is just showing like 8 of the projects I worked on with them. The top 4 here are showing like the design and then it being constructed. So you could kind of trace that along. And then the bottom 4 are ones that were either kind of thought projects or on hold of some sort. And it's also been just like it's been a great way to learn more about building performance and just practice drawing, which I think as architects or as an architect, I always love seeing other people's drawing sets. Okay, so I'm realizing that I'm kind of running long on time. I think I'm probably like right at the spot where you wanted me to finish. Um, I'm happy to call it, Mark, but also I have like a little more that I could run through.
If you want to run through a little bit more, maybe on the
Okay,
on
just
the
like I can see you
double
while
speed, you know.
okay. Yeah, I can see you. So just wave when you want me to stop. So actually this was kind of the end of what I put in the Flansburgh. I just wanted to say like it was a great moment for me, again, like an introspective moment where I stepped back and I thought, I'm working on a lot of things I'm passionate about. I haven't really put my hat in the ring for multifamily housing. And why is that? And I think what I realized was that like just the fear of rejection is powerful. And I was telling myself a lot of things about how people would receive me. And I decided to like put that aside and just go for it. And so this next project was the result of that kind of like refocusing. Um, and so this is a project in Portland, Maine. Um, it's 30 units of affordable housing. So I think in the end, 50%, I think there will be half of them will be 50% AMI and the other half will be 60% AMI, which is adjusted median income or area median income. So this is like how people think about affordability. So this is in the Munjoy Hill neighborhood of Portland. So this is an aerial to give you a sense of the neighborhood and the water. This is the site in the middle here. And so we did analysis of the neighborhood just so that we weren't like dropping a spaceship in the middle of the neighborhood. We wanted the building to be contextual. And so just trying to call forward some of the traits like that windows stack in this neighborhood. They tend to be like rectangularly oriented. There's a lot of the projects or a lot of the houses in the neighborhood are clapboard. They have like strong cornices, window trim, porches. And so this is the existing building on the site, which is the site of a Legion Hall. And then this is the proposed building. And so we were trying to break down the size of the building through bands of color that pull in the tones from the neighbors. So it's all showing a pine. So pulling in like the tone of the direct neighbor here, pulling in the brick from the building across the street here, and then using a kind of contemporary approach to trim to come up with like essentially like a vertical batten that divides those two that then ties into a horizontal kind of like homage to a cornice. Also a porch that pokes off the front. It's accessible, a bench that meets the street. So this gives you a sense of the bulk of the building, which again is a 30-unit affordable project. Anybody that works on affordable housing knows that the low-income housing tax credits have strict requirements that are administered at the state level. So there's a lot of tables and charts and rules about room sizes and specific dimensions. And so the project really puzzles together to fit these 30 units across 4 floors. So this is showing the ground level plan. One of the things we did was we pulled the stairs inboard of the building to maximize the available envelope for windows, which is what allowed us to fit the 30 units. So it's primarily 2 and 3 bedroom units for like kind of family sized units. And then the blues are studios. And I'm also really excited because the basement is going to have a lot of social program, and we are digging light wells to bring light to those spaces. So a community room, shared laundry, bike maintenance, and personal storage. Okay, this is sort of the last one. So this was the Future Decker, which many of you might have participated in or know about. This was one of the sites that we went after in Dorchester. And again, looking at the triple decker type, our observation was that it's pretty much always 3 units. It has a front and back stair, and usually some sort of outdoor space or social space on the front or back of the building. And so what if we took that kind of social space and that one stair and put them in the middle, and then use that as a kind of spine that the units were anchored off of? So it could become, you would have half the stairs for double the units, but also some kind of interior social space that could link up with some outdoor amenities. And so this was our project. So this is showing, again, like this was three bed units that stack in the front, and then two beds and 3 studios in that back volume, and the stair connecting them in the middle. So it's showing that from outside. This is the plan of that. So you can see that that stair social zone becomes, it connects to like a greenhouse space on the ground level that then connects to an outdoor space. And you can look into that greenhouse from the upper levels. So this is showing that kind of special space in the middle. And then just, I think in all of our work, we try to be contextual. So a lot of the houses in Dorchester are use like a clapboard siding, and some of them are in brighter colors. So we're just kind of leaning into that. The last thing is just the roach travel. So I talked about the roach earlier. I went on the travel, as Mark mentioned at the beginning, over last summer and the summer before. I went and saw about 30 different multifamily housing projects, the various communal compositions, and took like 12,000 photos, and then spent a year just like being stressed about what to do with all that. And I signed up to speak at I put a submission in to speak at the co-housing conference, which I was able to see Mark at about a month ago. And so that motivated me to put the report together. And so this is the outcome of that. So I have just finished turning this into kind of book form. And so this is just some outtakes of that. And I'm talking with publishers right now because I want this to be available more broadly than just, like a PDF that gets dropped online. So the format of the book is that there's 40 lessons about communal housing. They're broken up into 7 categories, and each lesson has a photo that like is exemplary of the lesson, and then a few other photos that show other ways that could be utilized. And that's it. I just was going to end with things I'm excited about, but I can just leave it up here for people to Google. I don't have to say anything about this. This is just the things that are like, I'm like thrilled about lately and just make me feel like the world is full of good possibilities.
Awesome, great. Well, thank you so much, Kyle, for this. Really, really great presentation. Really appreciate how you've sort of like, both shown us your work, but also kind of brought us along in this journey from the start, from an early point to where you're at today. And I think there's a real consistency to the work from, your student thesis, competitions, professional work. I think it's really remarkable seeing that trajectory. And, you asked some really interesting questions through the work, like on things like how we live, how like our spatial living conditions are connected to issues of consumption, and how this is kind of reflected in our contemporary lives. So, and I think considering like the housing issues we're dealing with today, we have housing crisis, homelessness, income inequalities. I think the work you're doing is really needed, and it provides kind of a view, a commentary and a solution, I think, on to ways that we might want to rethink how we live. So I really appreciate the way you're kind of really all the work you're doing and how you're pulling this together. So we don't have a ton of time left for the scheduled time, but I don't know how flexible you are with your time, Kyle, but I think we'd like to open it up to some questions. And I think these could be questions about what you presented, about your work. I also feel that, because, you were the recipient of the Flansburgh Young Architects Award, there might be people here who are considering applying for this award. So if there's questions about how, like what you were thinking when you applied, the process and things like that, like open up to any of those things. So I don't know if anybody wants to ask a question, feel free. You can raise a digital hand, you can unmute, I think we'll just kind of keep it pretty casual.
And I can stay for a while.
Okay.
I think last year's ran like 30 minutes long. And so I watched that. I was kind of like, oh, okay, there's like a little flex here.
It
But
did,
people
yes.
should feel free to go. Like it's definitely not going to hurt my feelings if you drop off.
Kyle, that was great, and it was super exciting to see. Personally, it was like really fascinating for me to see your arc from, the way that you kind of worked through explorations and your persistence with the roach all the way through, your current practice. And I'd love to hear, and maybe this is a little bit to Mark's point too, how what you've been given some time for reflection and some opportunities to, I think, in a kind of exceptional way, reflect on your practice and its meaning through these awards that you've won. And I would love to hear what, like, if there's anything surprising that came out of that for you, or what was the kind of, drawback. I don't know. I'd love to hear you just reflect on the awards and what they afforded you.
Oh, I think that's a great question. I feel like I already ran a little bit long with my presentation, so I'm like trying to be concise. I think the roach has been incredibly like meaningful to me. I think it was a way of staying close to the things I cared about in the midst of just like the busyness of life and just other places that, your professional life takes you. So I always like kind of looked forward to that. And I think because I entered it so many times, by the time that I actually won, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And so it felt like, even though of course I would have loved to have won it like the first time I had entered or something, I wouldn't have been ready to, like, I wouldn't have known what to do with it. And so when I won it, I thought like, wow, this just feels like kismet, because now I know like what I want to go out and do. And I feel like I sort of have the skills to like benefit from it in a better way. And then of course, like pass that on to other people, hopefully. And I think this one, I guess I mentioned it a little bit in the presentation. Like, I think that I view things like the Flansburgh as just a really great opportunity to reflect on what you're doing. And like, as you know, because you have your own practice, which is great, everyone should check out Supernormal. But like, it's not an easy path, right? So I think that it is important to kind of return to it probably as frequently as possible, right? To ask yourself, like, why am I doing this? Like, this is not the path of least resistance. Why am I doing this? What is the bigger, what are my bigger goals out of doing this? And so I think doing this just helped me realize that like I wasn't living up to exactly what I wanted to and starting it. And so I think that helped push me out of my comfort zone in a positive way.
Well, for whatever it's worth, it's like remarkably consistent. I just can't, it's sort of mind blowing how you've been able to really trace that line and really develop it. So congratulations.
Kyle, there's I think a question that came up in the chat. They were, asking like, how did you figure out what to do after the Roach travels, and how did you arrive at the book?
Well, I don't know if she's on this call or not, but so I just kind of spun my wheels for a really long time, because I was frankly like, it was such a what's the word? Like a fire hose of inspiration, that I thought like, wow, I'll never be able to put this into any sort of package that does it justice. And just the quantity of like that many photos was really overwhelming. But I had a coffee date with Megan Penzano, who teaches at the GSD, but she also is the secretary for the Roach and like a friend. And so I was just saying like, oh, Megan, like I visited like 40 projects, even if I just did like 20 pages or 15 pages on each to try and walk people through them, suddenly you're at like 1,000-page book, like I can do a website, I could do all these different things. And she was like, over the course of this conversation, what we kind of got to was like, maybe it's, you know, like, what if it's a pattern language, but for communal housing? And it was like, oh, and even though like that's not actually what I wanted to do precisely, like I think there's some problems with that book, even though there's a lot of good things. That was like enough of a seed inspiration that I was just like, yes. And then I was able to kind of chart out a process of like, okay, like now I will mechanically go through all of these photos and put my insights into a spreadsheet. And then like, you know, I was able to basically chunk it in the way that like all those books tell you to do. But I had to get over like that initial, you know, just overwhelm to kind of get there. And then once I had that sort of process in place, it kind of came together very quickly.
Great. I mean, I guess to follow up on that, now that you've been able to kind of think about that and sort of consolidate that and put this sort of book together, do you feel differently? Oh, there it is. Do you feel differently about that? How do you feel now that you've been able to output this thing? That's a kind of consolidation of all the work, travel, and all this.
I'm like a very reluctant writer, and I don't give myself credit in that area. So I think I thought like I made a book, but it's not a real book. You know, like I just kept, I think that was actually sort of a useful way of just doing it, was to tell myself like I'm fulfilling the requirement that the Roach has of submitting a report. This is not a book. This is just that. And then once it kind of was like 220 pages and felt like I showed it to a few friends who I trust and they were positive, and then I presented at that conference and people were positive about it. And I shared it with a publisher and they said that they were interested. Like, I think that getting that sort of like external validation and also like a little bit of critical distance has helped me feel like, you know, I think I'm legitimately excited about it at this point.
Oh, that's awesome. I can't wait to order a copy whenever it's available. So,
Such a slow, annoying process. I think if everything goes well, it's going to be like another year and a half. So
yeah. Awesome. Well, are there any other questions? Any people wondering about? Oh, I see something popped up in the chat.
I can read it.
Yeah.
I appreciate your passion for affordable housing. I was wondering, where did this come from? What keeps you inspired in this field of work? I think this just comes from like where we are as a culture right now. Like I feel like every city is going through its version, and not just cities. Like I feel like everywhere is going through a pretty intense housing crisis. I think it's incredibly acute at the moment, but I feel like it's been like kind of there for most of my adult life. And so I think in grad school, as I started to think more about housing and about like the potential I saw there for, you know, like limiting consumption, you know, as a way, like just the overlaps I talked about of um, sharing things as a way of having more, but spending less, and also being more responsible to the environment. Like it just seemed like so logical to me. And so I don't think like co-housing is the answer to everything, but I think there are ways that just traditional multifamily housing can learn from that. And yeah, I don't know. I just feel like maybe it's one of those things where I'm so close to it, I can barely answer the question. But yeah, that is definitely like the animating force in my life.
Thank you. Any other questions people might have? Whether it's about Kyle's work or Kyle in general, or the Flansburgh Award? Right. Well, I'd say, I think if anyone here is, at that point where they're interested in submitting for this, I'd really encourage you to do so. There's a number of resources on the BSA's website about the Flansburgh Award. You can go like this, this talk will be recorded. I mean, it is recorded. It will be published on the BSA's website. You can go back and check out some of the previous award winners' talks as well, and some of their work. So it's a really great place, and I would highly encourage people to consider submitting for that if they feel like, you're in that position. And I've been on the Honors and Awards Committee for this is my 3rd year. This is my last year, and we review these submissions every year. And I would say like it's really amazing to see the kind of work that comes through. And I wish we could give everyone the award, because there's just so much good stuff that we see, so many talented people. And so I think but with that, like the people who kind of receive it, it's really remarkable the work that they provide. So Kyle, I want to thank you again so much for your work, for all you do, for the contributions you're making to the field today, and I know you're going to be doing lots in the future. So thank you, and thank you for the presentation. We really appreciate everything.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining. And I think that's it for our talk today. And we will see you. Come to BSA events, come check things out, and we will see you all around. Thank you.
And apply for the Flansburgh.
Yes.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thanks, everyone.